It is 3:14 in the morning, 40 below, the kind of cold that makes the trees crack like rifle shots in the dark. Private First Class Danny Reeves is alone at a forward listening post 12 miles from the nearest base, and he is talking into his radio the way you talk when you are trying to convince yourself everything is fine. He describes the tree line. He describes the shape standing there. He describes how it will not move, will not respond, will not do anything except stand there in the dark, staring back at him. His commanding officer, Captain Hale, is on the other end of that radio. He tells me that the last thing Danny said before the transmission went silent was not a scream. It was quieter than that, far worse than a scream. And then the radio stayed open for 6 more hours, transmitting from a post where nobody was left alive to press the button. 6 hours and 14 minutes of open channel. 6 hours and 14 minutes of something on the other end that was not Danny. I have spent 3 years trying to understand what happened at that post. What follows is the closest thing to the truth I have been able to find. I want you to decide for yourself what it means. Before I tell you what happened on that radio, I want to tell you who Danny Reeves was, because that matters. It matters more than the classification stamps and the redacted pages and the carefully worded nothing that the Army put out afterward. Danny was a person before he was a case number, and the people who loved him deserve at least that much. He was 22 years old, from a small town called Hoonah on Chichagof Island, southeastern Alaska. If you have never heard of it, that tells you everything you need to know about the kind of place it is. Fewer than 1,000 people, surrounded by old-growth Sitka spruce that block the sky in every direction. The kind of town where everybody's father and grandfather fished the same water and knew the same silences. Danny grew up in that silence. He was comfortable in it in a way that most people never are. His mother, Ruth, told me that even as a small boy, he would disappear into the woods behind their house for hours at a time and come back completely at peace. Not lost. Never lost. She said he had a sense for wild places that she had never seen in anyone else. He enlisted in 2001, 2 weeks after his 20th birthday, before September changed everything and before enlistment became the kind of decision that carried a different weight. He joined because his uncle had served, and because Hoonah did not offer much in the way of futures, and because Danny genuinely believed, Ruth told me, that he was built for it. She was not wrong. He tested high. His drill instructors noted his unusual composure in high-stress field environments. He was exactly the kind of soldier the Army looks for when it needs someone to sit alone in the dark for long periods of time and stay sharp. That is what a listening post is, if you are not familiar. It is not a base. It is not a facility. It is a position. In Alaska's Northern Training Corridor, a listening post in 2003 meant a small, elevated platform of timber and canvas, a radio setup, a thermal scope, a field journal, and one man whose entire job was to observe a designated sector of terrain and report anything unusual. No fire team, no backup within immediate reach. The posts were used to train soldiers in isolation protocols, long-duration solo observation, and cold weather endurance. They rotated personnel every 72 hours. Danny had done it twice before, without incident. The Northern Training Corridor sits roughly 12 miles northeast of what was then called Fort Richardson, now Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. In March of 2003, that terrain is something you have to experience to fully understand. The temperature that week was running between -35 and -42 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. The boreal forest there is dense and largely untouched, a mix of white spruce and black spruce and tamarack that grows in strange, twisted configurations because of the permafrost beneath. The tree line at the edge of the post's observation sector was approximately 300 meters out. In daylight, with a good scope, you could see clearly into the first 100 meters of that forest. At night, even with thermal equipment, the trees created a wall of interference that made precise identification of anything moving within them extremely difficult. Captain Marcus Hale was Danny's commanding officer. He is retired now, living outside Juneau, and it took me 18 months and 4 unanswered letters before he agreed to talk. When he finally did, he sat across from me at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee he never drank, and he said, "I have been waiting for someone to ask me the right questions about that night for 10 years. I just did not think anyone ever would." He told me that Danny was not someone who rattled easily. He said in 2 years of working with him, he had never once seen Danny amplify a situation, never seen him catastrophize, never seen him mistake a shadow for a threat. He was precise, economical with his words. When he filed observation reports, they were terse and accurate, and never contained anything that was not directly relevant. Hale said that when Danny's first call came in at 3:06 in the morning, the content of what he was saying was unusual enough. But what really stopped Hale cold was the tone. Not frightened, not panicked, just deliberate. Like he was narrating something for the record because some part of him understood that the record was going to matter later. The post Danny was assigned to sat on a low ridge above a frozen creek drainage. Hale told me that the position had been used in rotation for about 3 years before that deployment cycle. Other soldiers had stayed there before Danny. Most of them reported nothing. One had filed a report 18 months earlier describing what he called unusual animal behavior at the tree line. A cluster of moose standing motionless for an extended period before dispersing simultaneously. The report was noted and filed. Nobody followed up on it. Nobody connected it to anything. Danny arrived at the post on March 1st, 2003, at approximately 1400 hours. He set up, checked in, and submitted his first observation report at 19:30 that evening. Nothing unusual. Temperature dropping. Visibility clear. Wind low. He signed off at 2200 and said he was going to get some sleep before the deep overnight watch. He checked in again at 3:06 a.m. That was his last voluntary transmission. Hale told me he was already awake when the call came in. That detail has always stayed with me. He was not pulled out of sleep by the radio. He was sitting at his desk in the operations room, doing nothing in particular, just awake at 3 in the morning, the way soldiers sometimes are when something in them has not settled. He said he could not explain it then, and he still cannot explain it now. He just had not been able to sleep. The radio crackled at 3:06, and Danny's voice came through clean. No interference, no distortion. Just Danny, steady and precise, the way Hale said he always was. Post 4 to Ops. You on? Hale reached over and keyed the handset. Ops on. Go ahead, Post 4. Got something at the tree line I want to log. Been watching it for about 20 minutes. Thought it was going to move off, but it has not. Hale told me his first assumption was an animal. Moose, black bear coming out of a shallow torpor, maybe a wolf pausing at the edge before crossing the open ground. All of those things happened in that corridor. None of them were unusual. He asked Danny to describe what he was seeing. There was a pause, not a long one, maybe 4 seconds. But Hale said in 2 years, he had never heard Danny pause before answering a direct question. And those 4 seconds registered somewhere in the back of his mind as the first wrong note of the night. It is tall. It is standing at the tree line, maybe 10 meters inside the first row of spruce. I have got it on thermal and it is reading warm, but the shape is wrong for anything I can identify. It is standing upright. It has been standing upright the entire time I have been watching. Bipedal? Yes, sir. Bipedal. But the proportions are off. The limbs are too long. I cannot get a clean read on the head because of the branch interference, but it is standing still. Completely still. It has not moved in 20 minutes. Hale said he asked Danny whether he had attempted any kind of contact protocol, a light signal, a verbal challenge. Danny said he had not. He said he did not want to announce his position until he knew what he was dealing with. Hale said that was the right call tactically, and he told him so. What Hale did not tell Danny, because he did not want to do anything that would interrupt Danny's focus or alter his observation, was that his own chest had tightened when Danny said the limbs were wrong. He could not say why. He just knew, the way you sometimes know things before your brain has finished processing them, that this was not going to resolve into something simple. Keep watching. Log everything. Check in every 5 minutes. If it moves toward you, you call immediately. Copy that. The next 4 check-ins came at 5-minute intervals exactly, which Hale said was itself a measure of Danny's discipline, because he was timing them manually in the field at -40 degrees with whatever was standing in those trees in front of him. Each one was brief and factual. 3:11. Still there. No movement. 3:16. Still there. No movement. It turned its head. Just the head. Nothing else moved. 3:21. Still there. I think it is taller than I initially estimated. Hard to confirm through the canopy. 3:26. Still there. It knows I am here. That last one stopped Hale completely. He keyed the handset immediately. Post 4. Say again your last. It knows I am here, sir. I do not know how to explain it, but it is looking directly at this position. Not at the ridge in general. At this position specifically. I have not used a light. I have not made noise. It just turned, and it is looking right at me. Can you still see it on thermal? Yes, sir. Is it moving? No, sir. It is just looking. Hale told me he made a decision at that point that he has questioned every single day for the past decade. He decided not to pull Danny out. Not yet. The post was 12 miles from base. Extraction in those conditions, at that hour, would take time, and what Danny was describing, as unsettling as it was, did not yet meet the threshold for a full extraction order. Nothing had moved toward him. Nothing had been aggressive. Hale told himself it could still be a person, a local, someone from one of the surrounding communities who had wandered into the corridor. He told himself that because he needed to tell himself something. Stay on it. Do not engage. I am going to make a call and come right back to you. Copy. Hale stepped away from the radio for less than 3 minutes. He woke his sergeant, told him to get to the ops room, and went back to the handset. His sergeant, a man named Vickers, who Danny had trained alongside, was pulling on his boots when Hale got back on the radio. Post 4 ops, still with me? Nothing. Post 4, this is ops. Come in. Static, clean static. No voice. Vickers appeared in the doorway, and Hale held up a hand to silence him before he could speak. He tried again. Danny, come in. That was the first time Hale had used Danny's name on the radio. He told me he had not even realized he had done it until Vickers looked at him with an expression he did not want to think about. The static continued. But here is the thing that Hale came back to over and over again in the years that followed. The detail that would not let him go, regardless of how many times he turned it over. The channel was not dead. A dead channel sounds different. A dead channel is absence. What he was hearing was presence. The transmission light on the handset was still lit. The channel was open. Something on Danny's end was holding the talk button down. He tried 6 more times in the next 20 minutes. He got nothing back but that open, breathing static and the lit transmission indicator that told him the signal was still coming from post 4. Vickers said quietly, "Sir, that is not equipment. Equipment fails off, not on." Hale did not answer him. He was already reaching for the phone to begin the extraction process, and while he was doing that, while his hand was literally on the receiver, the static shifted. Just once. For approximately 2 seconds. It was not a voice exactly. Hale has never called it a voice. What he has said consistently across every conversation I have had with him is that it was a sound that used the same frequencies as a voice without being one. Structured, deliberate, like something that had heard human speech and was attempting to reproduce the shape of it without understanding what shape meant. Vickers took a step back from the radio. Neither of them said anything for a long time after that. The extraction team left base at 3:51 a.m. 12 miles of frozen terrain in the dark, minus 40 degrees, through a corridor that offers no straight lines and no easy passage. Hale estimated 90 minutes minimum. He stayed on the radio the entire time they were moving. He did not leave that operations room. He told me that leaving felt like abandoning Danny a second time, which I thought was a strange way to phrase it, till I understood what he meant by it later. The transmission light stayed on. For 6 hours and 14 minutes from Danny's last vocal contact, the channel remained open and active. Signal confirmed live, originating from post 4. Hale logged every minute of it, because logging was the only thing he could do that felt like action. In his personal record, which he showed me but would not allow me to photograph, then I noted the character of the static at various points throughout those 6 hours. His descriptions are not the descriptions of a man trying to build a story. They are terse, functional, military, which makes them worse somehow than if he had been dramatic about it. 3:34, static consistent, transmission light active, no vocal content. 3:49, brief tonal shift, approximately 1 to 2 seconds, non-vocal, non-mechanical. 4:17, static consistent. 4:52, second tonal shift, longer this time, approximately 4 seconds, structured. After the 0452 entry, Vickers asked to be relieved. He told Hale he needed air. He stepped outside and did not come back in for 20 minutes. And when he came back in, his face was a color Hale said he had never seen on a soldier before and has not seen since. Hale did not ask him what was wrong. Some things you do not ask because you already know the answer, and saying it out loud makes it heavier. A third person entered the operations room at approximately 5:20. A signal specialist named Corporal Adiz Obi, who had come in early for her shift and picked up immediately that something was wrong from the body language alone. She sat down at the secondary monitoring station without being asked, put on her headset, and listened. She was there for the remainder of the 6 hours. I tracked her down 2 years after I first spoke to Hale. She lives in Houston now. She answered the door with the expression of someone who had been expecting this conversation for a long time. She told me, "The first thing I noticed was the rhythm. Static is not rhythmic. It is random by nature. What was coming through that channel had intervals. Not perfectly regular, but close enough that after about 10 minutes, I started counting. I did not tell Captain Hale what I was doing because I did not want to say it out loud. I asked her what the intervals suggested to her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, breathing. It suggested breathing. Something slow, much slower than human. Like whatever was on the other end of that radio was not in any hurry at all. At 6:33, the tonal shifts became more frequent. Hale's log records them at 6:33, 6:41, 6:47, and 6:52. 4 in 19 minutes, after nearly 3 hours of intermittent silence. Obi told me the shifts during that period were different in character from the earlier ones. Less like an attempt to produce sound, more like something that had stopped trying to produce sound and was instead just present, occupying the frequency. She said it reminded her of the way a large animal sometimes stands and watches you without making any sound at all. And the silence itself is the thing that tells you it is not afraid of you. I asked Hale whether anyone above him had been monitoring the channel during those 6 hours. He looked at his coffee cup and said, "That is the right question." He told me that at approximately 4:30, roughly 90 minutes into the 6 hours, he received a call from a number he did not recognize. The person on the other end identified themselves by rank, which Hale would not repeat to me, and told him to continue logging, but to cease extraction attempts until daylight. When Hale pushed back and said he had a man missing in the field, the voice said, "We are aware of that, Captain. Continue logging." He said, "Sir, with respect, I need to know who we are in this conversation." The voice said, "You need to log and you need to wait. That is what you need." The call ended. Hale stood there holding the phone for a moment, and then he put it down and went back to the radio because there was nothing else to do. He never identified the caller. The number did not appear in any directory he could access, and when he tried to trace it through base communications the following week, he was told, quietly and without elaboration, that the inquiry was not something he should pursue. At 9:28 a.m., as thin gray Alaskan light was beginning to define the tree line outside the operations room windows, the transmission light went out. No fade, no deterioration, no final shift in the static. It simply stopped, the way you would turn off a lamp. And Obi pulled off her headset and sat very still for a moment. She told me she felt something she still struggles to describe accurately. Not relief, not dread. Something that had no name, which was in some ways worse than either of those things. Hale noted in his log, 9:28, transmission terminated, origin post 4, duration from last vocal contact, 6 hours, 14 minutes. Cause undetermined. He underlined undetermined twice. Then he closed the log, picked up his coffee cup, found it stone cold, and set it back down. The extraction team reached post 4 at 0944. Sergeant Vickers was on the extraction team. Hale told me he had not ordered that. Vickers had volunteered himself onto it quietly, without explanation, and nobody had stopped him. Hale said he understood why. Vickers had sat in that room and listened to those 6 hours the same way he had. When you have done that, when you have been that close to something without being able to name it, you need to see the place it came from with your own eyes. You need the physical reality of it to put somewhere in your mind, because without it, the whole thing just floats. They reached post 4 at 9:44 in pale, flat morning light, with the temperature still sitting at -38 degrees. Vickers told me what they found, or more accurately, what they did not find, in a single phone call that lasted 11 minutes. He is not a man who uses extra words. He said the post was intact. The canvas shelter was standing. The thermal scope was in its mount. The field journal was open on the small folding table Danny used as a desk. And the last entry was timed at 3:04, 2 minutes before his first transmission to Hale. The entry read, "Something at the tree line. Watching it. We'll call it in." That was the complete entry. No punctuation, written fast. The radio was on. Transmission light dark as of 0928. talk button in the natural released position. Danny's cold weather gear, his outer shell jacket, and his insulated gloves were folded neatly on the platform beside the radio. His boots were placed together underneath the folding table, laces tucked inside. His rifle was leaning against the timber frame of the shelter, safety on, one round chambered. Vickers said to me, "In 20 years of service, I have never seen anything that scared me as much as those folded clothes. A man does not fold his clothes in minus 40 degrees in the dark in the middle of an incident. That is not a thing that happens. And they were not like he had taken them off in a hurry. They were neat, deliberate, like someone had taken time with them." I asked him whether there were tracks. He said there were Danny's boot prints from his arrival 2 days earlier, partially filled with wind-blown snow and nothing else. The ground around the post in every direction was unbroken. No tracks leading away, no disturbance in the snow at the tree line. Whatever had been standing in those trees at 3:06 in the morning had left no physical record of itself, and neither had Danny's departure. And the extraction team secured the post, logged the scene, and called it in. Hale received the report in the operations room and said nothing for a long time. Then he asked Vickers, over the radio, whether anything felt wrong at the post beyond the obvious. Vickers said, "It is quiet, sir. Too quiet. The birds are not there. Alaska's boreal forest in early March is not loud, but it has a baseline. Ravens, chickadees, the occasional gray jay moving through the spruce." Vickers said the post and the surrounding tree line were completely silent in a way that felt deliberate rather than natural, as if the ordinary life of the place had simply stepped back and was waiting for something to pass. They were pulled out by 11 o'clock. The post was left standing. The debrief happened that same afternoon at 1400 in a room Hale described as one he had never been in before and has never been able to find since. Which sounds like the kind of thing a person says for effect until you realize he means it literally. He said it was in a section of the building he did not recognize, accessed through a corridor that did not appear on any floor plan he had ever seen for that facility. There were 4 people in the room besides himself. None of them were introduced by name. None of them were in uniform, which at a military installation in the middle of an active situation struck Hale as the kind of detail you notice and file away because it does not fit anything. He was asked to give a full account of the night's events in his own words, which he did. He was asked to surrender his personal log, which he did, though not before he had already copied 6 pages of it by hand onto a separate sheet of paper that he folded into his sock before he walked into that room. Those 6 pages are what he showed me 18 months after I first wrote to him. At the end of the debrief, one of the 4 people, a woman with a flat, Midwestern accent, who had not spoken until that moment, leaned forward and said to him, "Captain Hale, in your professional assessment, was Private Reeves the kind of soldier who would abandon his post and his equipment voluntarily?" Hale said, "No, absolutely not." She wrote something down. Then she said, "That assessment has been noted. You are done here." He was walked back to a part of the building he recognized, and that was the end of it. No follow-up questions, no further interviews. No investigation timeline communicated to him. He asked his commanding officer 2 days later what the status of the inquiry was and was told, in language that was polite but extremely clear, that the matter was being handled at a level above the installation and that Hale's continued involvement was neither required nor appropriate. Within 30 days, the unit had been dispersed. Not dramatically, not all at once, which would have been noticeable, but in 1s and 2s through routine reassignment orders that moved people to postings in Georgia, in Germany, in South Korea. Vickers went to Fort Benning. Obi was transferred to a signals unit in Heidelberg. Hale himself received orders for a training command in Virginia that he had not requested and did not want. He told me, "I have never believed in coincidence as a general principle, but after that month, I stopped believing in it entirely." Ruth Reeves was notified that her son had gone missing during a training exercise and that the investigation was ongoing. She told me she received that notification in a phone call that lasted less than 4 minutes. She never received another update. She has never been told anything further. She still lives in Hoonah. She still waits. Danny Reeves was 22 years old. Marcus Hale retired from the Army in 2013 with a record that any officer would be proud of. 2 commendations, a clean service history, the kind of exit that comes with a handshake and a folded flag and a reasonable pension. He told me that on the day he handed in his final paperwork, he felt nothing that resembled pride. What he felt, he said, was the specific exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has finally been given permission to put it down, only to discover that putting it down is not actually possible, that the weight has become structural, that you have been holding it so long it is holding you back. He moved to a house outside Juneau because he wanted trees and water and distance from anything institutional. He fished. He kept to himself. He slept badly. He told me that for the first 3 years after retirement, he woke up at 3:06 every single morning without an alarm. Not approximately, not around that time. At 3:06 exactly, every morning, as reliably as a clock. He would lie there in the dark and listen to the silence of his house and think about Danny Reeves standing at his scope, watching something in the tree line that would not move. I never stopped asking myself whether I made the right call. Not once in 10 years did I let myself off the hook for it. I could have pulled him out at 3:26 when he said it knows I am here. That was the moment. I knew it was the moment, and I did not act on it, and I have to live with that every day for the rest of my life. I asked him whether he thought pulling Danny out at 3:26 would have changed the outcome. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I do not know." And that is the part I cannot resolve. Because whatever was in those trees had already been watching him for 20 minutes before he even made the first call. Maybe it did not matter when we acted. Maybe it had already decided. The decision that changed everything for Hale, the one that eventually led him to me, or led me to him, depending on how you want to look at it, happened in the winter of 2011. He had been in Juneau for just under 2 years. A neighbor of his, an older Tlingit man named Walter, whose last name Hale asked me not to use, invited him for coffee one afternoon in the straightforward way that people in small Alaskan communities extend hospitality, without agenda or ceremony. They had spoken maybe a dozen times before that. Enough to be comfortable, not enough to be close. They were sitting at Walter's kitchen table when Hale, without fully intending to, began talking about that night. He said it came out the way things come out when you have suppressed them for too long. Sideways. He started talking about Alaska and training corridors and the way the boreal forest sounds at night, and somewhere in the middle of all that preamble, Walter put his coffee cup down and looked at him steadily and said, "Something happened to one of your men." It was not a question. Hale said, "Yes." Walter asked him where. Hale described the corridor, the general location, the ridge above the frozen creek drainage. Walter nodded slowly, in a way that suggested recognition rather than surprise. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "That area has been known for a long time, not by the military, before the military. My grandfather knew it. His grandfather knew it. There are places in this territory where the boundary between what we understand and what we do not is thinner than it should be. Your people built a training ground on top of one of them. Hale asked him what that meant practically, what it meant for what had happened to Danny. Walter chose his next words with the deliberateness of a man who understood that what he was about to say could be misunderstood very easily and wanted to limit that possibility. He said, "I am not going to tell you a story that belongs to my community, as if it is an explanation for something that happened to yours. That is not how this works, and it is not something I am willing to do. What I will tell you is that the thing you are describing, something that stands at the edge of the forest and watches, something that does not respond the way living things respond, something that seems to understand where you are before you have given yourself away. That is not new. That is not something your unit discovered. That has been known in this territory for longer than anyone can measure. And the people who have known it longest have always said the same thing about it." Hale asked him what they said. Walter said, "Do not look at it. Do not engage it. Do not try to name it out loud. And if someone you are responsible for has already done all three of those things, then you pray. That is all that is left." Hale told me he drove home from that conversation and sat in his truck in his driveway for almost an hour without going inside. He was not emotional in the way you might expect. He said he felt a cold, clarifying stillness that was different from anything he had experienced before. Not peace exactly. More like the specific feeling of a question that has been open for 8 years, finally being acknowledged as a question. Not answered. Just seen. What he did with that conversation took him another 2 years. He began, quietly and carefully, to research the broader pattern of what had been reported in and around that training corridor over the preceding decades. He was methodical about it. He used FOIA requests, cross-referenced incident reports from neighboring communities, and spoke to 4 other veterans from different units who had trained in that corridor at various points and come away with accounts they had never formally reported. The accounts were not identical, but they shared enough structural similarity that Hale, who was not a man inclined toward pattern seeking in general, could not dismiss what he was seeing. Each account involved the tree line. Each involved something upright and disproportionate that did not respond to conventional stimuli. 3 of the 4 veterans reported a period of unusual silence before the encounter. The birds and small animals going quiet in the way Vickers had described on the morning they found the post empty. 2 of them reported that the encounter ended not with the figure leaving, but with it simply no longer being there. As if presence and absence were states it could move between without transition. None of those men lost anyone. None of their accounts ended the way Danny's did. Hale told me he spent a long time trying to understand what the difference was. Here's what Danny had done or encountered that the others had not. And he kept coming back to one thing. One detail that separated Danny's night from every other account he found. Danny had been from Hoonah. He had grown up in the forest. He had spent his whole childhood moving through wild places and feeling at home in them. He would not have been afraid the way someone unfamiliar with that terrain would have been afraid. Hale said quietly, almost to himself, "I think it chose him because he was not running. I think it wanted someone who would stay still and watch it back." He picked up his coffee cup, finally took a sip, set it back down. I think Danny gave it exactly what it was looking for. I drove back from Juneau on a gray afternoon in October, with Walter's words sitting in the passenger seat beside me, the way certain sentences do when they refuse to stay in the past where you put them. 3 instructions, simple enough that a child could follow them. And Danny, through no fault of his own, through the simple act of doing his job correctly, had broken every single one of them before the night was an hour old. I have thought about that a lot since. About the fact that Danny did all three, that his entire job that night was to look at it, that his training demanded he engage it, that his professionalism required him to name it out loud into a radio for the record. He did everything right by every standard the Army had given him. He was precise and calm and thorough, and he stayed at his post and he reported accurately, and none of it helped him at all. There is one thing I have never been able to settle in my mind, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. The transmission ran for 6 hours and 14 minutes after Danny's last words. Something held that talk button down for 6 hours and 14 minutes in minus 40-degree darkness at a post where, as far as anyone has ever been able to determine, nothing living remained. The extraction team found the button in its natural released position when they arrived at 9:44, which means whatever was holding it down let go at 9:28, exactly 16 minutes before the team arrived. 16 minutes. I do not know what to do with that. I have sat with it for 3 years, and I still do not know what to do with it. It could mean nothing. Timing can be coincidental. Except that nothing else about that night was coincidental. And I find it very difficult to look at that 16-minute gap and see randomness. It looks to me more like awareness, like something that knew the team was coming and chose its moment. Ruth Reeves still lives in Hoona. She still has the last letter Danny wrote her, postmarked February 22nd, 2003, 9 days before he went to that post. She told me he wrote that the Alaska sky at night was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life, that it made him feel small in a way that was comfortable rather than frightening, that he felt at home there. I hope, wherever he is, that is still true. His name was Danny Reeves. He had not yet seen his 23rd birthday. He was from Hoona, Alaska. He deserves to be remembered by more than a redacted document and a transmission that nobody will officially acknowledge ever happened. If this story stayed with you, please share it with someone. Leave a comment below telling me what you think that 16-minute gap means, because I genuinely want to know. Subscribe if you have not already. There are more stories like this one, stories that were buried, stories that deserve to be heard, and I will be here every week to tell them.